Chapter 4. 3 orbits later, Greta knew that the ship had diminished greatly in size, or else the small sphere had expanded, or both changes had occurred. Moreover, on the visual screen, the secondary had lost its spherical shape and become a fat disk during the first circling of the ship to establish its orbit. Greta was puzzling over this and thinking of calling Van Voorden, the physicist chief, when Wellington's corpse came around the primary again. The body caught up with the other satellites, and for a moment, the primary, the secondary, and the Sleipnir were in a line, strung on an invisible cord. Suddenly, the secondary and the corpse jumped toward each other. They ceased their motion when within a quarter-kilometer of each other. The second regained its globular form as soon as it had attained its new orbit. Wellington's arms and legs, during this change in position, moved in as if she had come to life. Her arms folded themselves across her breasts, and her legs drew up so that her thighs were against her belly. Greta called Van Voorden. The physicist said, "Out here, the cabin boy, if we had one, knows as much as I do about what's going on or what to expect. The data, such as they are too inadequate, too confusing. I can only suggest that there was an interchange of energy between Wellington and the secondary." "A quantum jump?" Greta said. "If that's so, why didn't the ship experience a loss or gain?" Darrell said, "Pardon, sir, but it did. There was a loss of 50 megakilowatts in 0.8 seconds. Van Voorden said, "The Sleipnir may have decreased in relative size because of decrease in velocity. Or maybe velocity had nothing to do with it. Or only partially, anyway. Maybe the change in spatial interrelationships among bodies causes other changes in shape, size, energy transfer, and so forth. I don't know. Tell me, how big is the woman corpse relative to the ship now?" "The detectors say she's 83 times as large. She increased, or we've decreased." Van Voorden's eyes grew even larger. Greta thanked him and cut him off. He ordered the Sleipnir to be put in exactly the same orbit as the secondary, but 10 decameters ahead of it. Van Voorden called back, "The jump happened when we were in line with the other 3 bodies. Maybe the Sleipnir is some sort of geometrical catalyst under certain conditions. That's only an analogy, of course." Wong verbally fed the order into the computer interface, part of his wrist console. The Sleipnir was soon racing ahead of the sphere. The ship and secondary were now approximately equal in size. The corpse, coming around the primary again, was still the same relative size as before. Greta ordered the vessel turned around so that the nose would be facing the sphere. This accomplished, he had the velocity reduced. The retrodrive braked them while the lateral thrust readjusted forces to keep the ship in the same orbit. Since the primary had no attraction for the Sleipnir, the ship had to remain in orbit with a constant rebalancing of thrusts. The sphere, now ballooning, inched towards the ship. "Radar indicates we're doing 26.6 decameters per second, relative to the primary," Wong said. "Power drain indicates we're making 25,000 times the speed of light. That, by the way, is not proportionate to what we were making when we left our world." "More braking," Greta said. "Cut it down to 15 DM. The sphere swelled, filled the screen. Greta involuntarily braced himself for the impact, even though he was so far from expecting one that he had not strapped himself into a chair. There had been none when the ship had broken through the skin of the universe. Greta had been told of the distortion in the ship when it had left the universe, and so was not entirely surprised. Nevertheless, he could not help being both frightened and bewildered when the front part of the bridge abruptly swelled and then rippled. Screen, bulkheads, deck, and crew waved as if they were cloth in a strong wind. Greta felt as if he were being folded into 1,000 different angles at the same time. Then, Wong cried out, and the others repeated his cry. Wong rose from his seat and put his hands out before him. Greta, standing behind and to one side of him, was frozen, as he saw dozens of little objects, firefly size, burning brightly, slip through the star screen and bulkhead and drift towards him. He came out of his paralysis in time to dodge one tiny, whitely glowing ball, but another struck his forehead, causing him to yelp. A score of the bodies passed him. Some were white, some blue, some green. One was topaz. They were at all levels above his head, even with his waist. One was almost touching the deck. He crouched down to let two pass over him, and as he did so, he saw Nagi, the communications officer, bent over and vomiting. The stuff sprayed out of his mouth and caught a little glow in it and snuffed it out in a burst of smoke. Then, the forepart of the bridge had reasserted its solidity and constancy of shape. There were no more burning objects coming through. Greta turned to see the aft bulkheads of the bridge quivering in the wake of the wave, and they, too, became normal. Greta shouted the override code so that he could take control from Wong, who was screaming with pain. He directed the ship to change its course to an upward vertical direction. There was no upward sensation, because the artificial G-field within the ship readjusted. Suddenly, the forward part of the bridge became distorted again, and the waves reached through the fabric of the ship and the crew. The star screen, which had been showing nothing but the blackness of space, speckled by a few stars, now displayed the great gray sphere in one corner and the crepuscular light. Greta, fighting the pain in his forehead and the nausea, gave another command. There was a delay of possibly 30 seconds, and then the Sleipnir began the turn that would take it back into a parallel orbit with the secondary. Greta, realizing what was happening shortly after being burned, had taken the Sleipnir back out of the universe. He put in a call for Corpsman and Dr. Willis and then helped Wong from his chair. There was an odor of burned flesh and hair in the bridge, which the air conditioning system had not as yet removed. Wong's face and hands were burned in 5 or 6 places, and part of the long, coarse black hair on the right side of his head was burned. 3 corpsmen and Wills ran into the bridge. Wills started to apply a pseudoprotein jelly on Greta's forehead, but Greta told him to take care of Wong first. Wills worked swiftly, and then, after spreading the jelly over Wong's burns and placing a false skin bandage over the burns, treated the captain. As soon as the jelly was placed on his forehead, Greta felt the pain dissolve. "3rd degree," Wills said. "It's lucky those things, whatever they are, weren't larger." Greta picked up his cigar, which he had dropped on the deck when he had first seen the objects racing towards him. The cigar was still burning. Near it lay a coal, swiftly blackening. He picked it up gingerly. It felt warm, but could be held without too much discomfort. Greta extended his hand, palm up, so that the doctor could see the speck of black matter in it. It was even smaller than when it had floated into the bridge through the momentarily opened interstices of the molecules composing the hull and bulkheads. "This is a galaxy," he whispered. Doc Wills did not understand. "A galaxy of our universe," Greta added. Doc Wills paled, and he gulped loudly. "You mean?" Greta nodded. Wills said, "I hope not our Earth's galaxy." "I doubt it," Greta said. "We were on the edge of the star fields farthest out. That is, the closest to the skin of our universe. But if we had kept on going..." Wills shook his head. Billions of stars, possibly millions of inhabitable, hence inhabited, planets were in that little ball of fire, now cool and collapsed. Trillions of sentient beings and an unimaginable number of animals had died when their world collided with Greta's forehead. Wong, informed of the true cause of his burns, became ill again. Greta ordered him to sickbay and replaced him with Gomez. Van Voorden entered the bridge. He said,
I suppose our main objective has to be our re-entry. But why couldn't we make an attempt to penetrate the primary, the nucleus? Do you realize what an astounding...
Greta interrupted. I realize, but our fuel supply is low. Very low. When we get back through the skin, we'll have a long way to go before we can return to base. Maybe too long. I don't dare exceed a certain speed during re-entry because of our size. It would be too dangerous. I don't want to wipe out any more galaxies. God knows the psychological problems we are going to have when the guilt really hits. Right now, we're numbed. No! We're not going to do any exploring.
But there may be no future investigations permitted,
Van Voorden said.
There's too much danger to the universe itself to allow any more research by ships like ours.
Exactly, Greta said. I sympathize with your desire to do scientific research, but the safety of the ship and crew comes first. Besides, I think that if I were to order an exploration, I'd have mutiny on my hands, and I couldn't blame my men. Tell me, Van Voorden, don't you feel a sense of dissociation? Van Voorden nodded and said,
But I'm willing to fight it. There is so much...
So much to find out, Greta said. Agreed. But the authorities will have to determine if that is to be done. Greta dismissed him. Van Voorden marched off with a straight back and an angry set to his shoulders and neck. But he did not give the impression of a powerful anger. He was, Greta thought, secretly relieved at the captain's decision. Van Voorden had made his protest for science's sake, but as a human being, Van Voorden must want very much to get home.